Welcome back to the Williams Real Estate Channel. I'm your host, Geordie Williams. Tonight we are running through suburbs and specific areas, and I'll give you postcodes of exact areas where not to buy in 2025. Strap yourselves in. There'll be plenty of data in this one. But firstly, before we get into the specific suburbs, I'd like to just recap on the 18-year land cycle where we currently sit. As you are probably well aware, if you've been following me for some time and you've been watching my monthly market updates, we use the 18-year land cycle and history as a framework to work out where markets sit, so then we can paint a picture of where markets are heading in the future. So we use this framework as a macro to understand which are the best markets and suburbs to buy in for the years ahead. As when you buy a property in a certain market, you are getting the future growth and not what has been historically. So as you can see on the screen, the 18-year land cycle consists of 14 years of expansion and 4 years of land-driven downturn. And the 14 years of expansion is interrupted with the mid-cycle slowdown. The last example of the mid-cycle slowdown was COVID between 2019 to 2022. And we are now on the blue marker away at the races through the land boom. And we are about 2 years away from the peak of the market. And come to 2027 is when we are due for the next land-driven downturn, which will be like a 2008 financial crisis or a 1991 recession we had to have, or 1972 land-driven downturn, and the list goes on, all the way back 200 years of history. If you trace them back, the best way to get a visual is using the Dow Jones, but you can use this framework to give you clarity of where markets are heading, as not all markets perform together. They are very fragmented. In the first half of the cycle, we typically see Sydney and Melbourne outperform. We then get a spillover into New South Wales and Victoria regions. They then perform through the mid part of the cycle. We then see a spillover into Brisbane, Perth, and Adelaide and their respective regions in the later part of the cycle. We then top out. Come 2026, the market then resets, and then Sydney and Melbourne again lead. So keep that in mind as we look at these future slides and these 20 years of sales data for these specific suburbs. We are in a similar point of the cycle of 2005, a couple of years before 2007 peak, before we'll go through the next GFC-like event. So 2005 is where we sit equivalent in the current cycle. So with that said, let's kick it off with the blue chip bandits, where they're saying to buy these days. So the blue chip bandits are saying buy blue chip because it always goes up in value and you always get compound growth and it all goes well and everything's great. Well, the first one off the list is Bondi. So Bondi Beach, if people don't know Bondi, Sydney, Australia. Bondi is pretty famous, eastern suburbs. This is one of the key areas where the blue chip bandits love to invest, as you supposedly get capital growth year on year consistently. However, based off history, we can see that we're in 2025 now, but equivalent market is entering 2005. And as you can see, over the next 5 to 7 years, Bondi Beach for units, that is going to be pretty well stagnant and flat, because that's what history showed us between 2005 all the way until pretty much 2012. So a solid 7 years. It pretty much stagnated and didn't really go anywhere until around 2013, 2014, where it had its significant run up to the peak of the market in 2022. And now it's protracted down and up, and it's going to continue within this band based off history, within this $1.2 to $1.6 million band for a good 7 to 10 years before it'll then hook and go through its next growth cycle. So if you see 2005 there, if we just scroll down, I've highlighted these as well to give you a better visual if you're more of a numbers person. So 2005, in Bondi, units were going, the medium units, price of units were going for 526,000, pretty much up and down, stagnant over a solid 7 years. So if you bought a unit now these days, you'll be paying around 1.45 million bucks. And based off history, we're in 2005. So we run some numbers. We can go 664, sorry, start again. 526,000 back in 2005 minus 643 in 2012. So 117,000 capital growth between that period. So that is where the future years ahead are heading for Bondi. So if we go 117 divided by 526 times 100. So if you bought a unit now in Bondi for 1.45 million bucks, you can expect 22% growth over the next 7 years based off history and based off the 18-year land cycle. So for me, I would not put my money there. If I was going to go spend $1.4 million, I'd go buy a block of units in a market set for a growth cycle that would cash flow rather than going and buying a $1.4 million unit in Bondi Beach that will pretty much flatline. You may get 20, 30% growth over the next 5 to 7 years. But as you can see, it's due for a protracted, stagnant, flat period, and you'll be holding it for that period of time with a yield of probably 2 or 3% if you're lucky. So for me, you're not real. That's pretty much a dud asset. You're going to lock yourself up with finance. You have a pretty poor rental yield, and you'll also have a pretty poor capital growth over the next 5 to 7 years. So that's blue chip area, supposed blue chip bandit area, number one. Number two, Manly. So this is Northern Beaches, Manly. As you can see, the last few years, yes, have been solid. But unfortunately for the blue chip bandits, they only look at 15 years of data. You need to dig deeper, unfortunately, and you need to study history and the 18-year land cycle. As you guys know, we are in a similar point of the cycle in 2005. We've had a good run. Top market topped out in 22, and now it's starting its protracted period for even longer until 2013. This is even more subdued, and you need to spend more money. So you need to spend 1.7 million. That's the medium. And if you bought in Manly now, I suppose a blue chip area that's going to give you lots of growth. 2005 units are going for 622,000, and you pretty much held it until around 2013 before it started to take off again. So you need to hold it for 8 years. If you bought a unit today for 1.6, 1.7 million in Manly, you can expect over the next 8 years, 76,000 based off history, 76,000. That's the growth between 2005 and 2012 divided by 698 equals, so you expect 10% return. I know a lot more areas where I could get better than 10% return on your money without having to outlay 1.67 million bucks to buy a unit. That would cash flow very poorly. So 722 times 100. 12%, 10, 12% return over the next 8 years in Manly. Not for us. So that's blue chip area number two. Now, they like going out and buying in supposed blue chip areas like Newcastle. For those that don't know Newcastle, Newcastle is a regional town about 2.5 hours north, 2 to 2.5 hours north of Sydney, an hour north of the Central Coast. Population around 350 to 400,000. Equivalent markets would be the likes of Toowoomba or Townsville, Albury, Wodonga. It's like a large regional hub. So the blue chip bandits like to spruce it up to say it's a supposed blue chip area that continues to have capital growth over the long term. Again, they're not quite correct. Yes, I guess this suburb, Merewether, in Newcastle has had some good growth, but most of the regions in New South Wales have had good growth over the last 7, 8 years. But as of 2022, it topped out and it's now starting its protracted stagnant period and will last until around 2013, 2014, based off history, until we then experience a solid growth run again. So we can go down and run the same numbers. You just spend 1.9 million bucks for a house. That's what they say to do, and throw a granny flat out the back, but you'll barely even get a 4 to 5% yield. If I was spending 1.9 million bucks, I'd be again going and buying a block of units in a market that's set for growth. So if you bought a house in Merewether, you can expect over the next 7 years to receive, let's see how much per capital growth you can expect. 659 minus 581, 78,000 divided by 581, 13%. So you will not get solid capital growth in Merewether based off history in the 18-year land cycle for the next 7 odd years. And you would have to pump out a lot of capital to buy a house that's pretty run down and build a granny flat to get a 4 or 5% yield. It's a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of capital, a lot of risk, and you won't even get that much capital growth, if not anything, over the next 5 to 7 years. That's, again, another suburb where you shouldn't be buying and where we're not buying over the next couple of years. So that's Merewether. Next one, and these just keep going from bad to worse. Warners Bay, another blue chip area that the blue chip bandits love to spruik up. I mean, supposed blue chip, I don't believe it's blue chip because it's pretty much just a regional town, regional suburb in a regional town. It had a solid run the last couple of years, but again, topped out in 2022, like most of the regions in New South Wales, and has started its protracted stagnant period, which is again going to last up to around 2012, 2013, based off history, as we are in an equivalent market of 2005. So the current medium is $1 million for Warners Bay. This is. So if we look back at history, I mean, I don't even have to run the numbers for this one. As you can see, it really didn't go anywhere. It just flatlined. If you bought today, you'll hold it for 7 years and it will pretty much go nowhere. It'll flatline. So Warners Bay can expect to continue on this flat up and down period. Yes, 1 year you might get 5-10% growth, but the next year you'll lose it. We'll go up and down within this $900 to $1 million band range for the next 7, 8 years until it then experiences its next solid growth run. So again, another suburb not to buy in 2025. On to the next. Charlestown, another supposed blue chip bandit suburb that the blue chip bandits like to buy in Newcastle in New South Wales. Again, topped out in 22 and has started its protracted growth period and will last up to around that 2012, 2013 mark based off history. So if we go back again, about 5% growth you can expect depending on the price you pay, but pretty much flatline for the next 7 years based off history, as we are in the equivalent market of 2005. Can't keep saying it. Study history, it will paint a picture of where we're heading in the future. And do not get into markets after they've had significant bull runs. It doesn't go on forever. The punters like to get in. The stupid money loves to jump into markets after a bull run as they look at the rearview mirror and they think a market's going to continue to keep going on and on forever, but it doesn't. They hit their limits and then they go through periods of stagnant flat growth until earnings rise, people's wages rise, people can afford, and then they hook through growth cycles. They don't just keep going on year forever. So the people that keep buying in these markets will learn the hard way. On to the next one. Bar Beach is another supposed blue chip bandit suburb that they like to buy in. Buy in Bar Beach. This is right on the beach in Newcastle. So this is houses. You got to spend at least 2 million bucks to get in there. And I wouldn't be buying a house for 2 million bucks. I'd be buying a block of units, if not two or three, with solid cash flow rather than a house with a 2 or 3% yield. And they'll try and tell you it's going to get capital growth consistently. But look what happened based off history. 2005, where we are currently, equivalent market, and it experienced probably 5–10% growth over that period between 2005 to 2012, which is a solid 8 years. So again, the market topped out around 22, come down, retraced. It will sit within this $2 million average price band for the next 7 to 8 years. Again, another suburb not to buy in 2025. All right, this is where shit just starts to get scary. Now, we've moved on from the blue chip bandits, and we're going to have to come up with a new name for the cash flow cuckoos. The old cash flow cuckoos that everyone chasing cash flow. We're going over to Perth. This is Armidale, about half an hour or 40 minutes southeast of Perth. Look it up. Everyone's charging in, looking for cash flow. But this is what gets really scary. So we're here in 2025 now. Obviously, Perth has had a good solid run. Everyone's talking it up, including your hairdresser, your barman, your butcher, your taxi driver. When everyone starts talking up a market, that's when you know it's not the market to be buying in. More so, probably selling. So it's had a good solid run over the last 3–4 years, as I'll show you. Since 2020, it's taken off. Yes, it's taken off. Yes, it's a booming market. Yes, days on market are low. But you don't want to get into markets when days on market are low, because then you overpay, you have to buy at an auction, and you buy over the intrinsic value and you hold it for many years with no growth. If you bought in Armidale now, or even this year or last year, we're an equivalent weather cycle as a 2005, and look what happened. Holy shit. You'll be holding it for, oh, 3, 4, 15 years. Like what happened in history when the market tops out in 2000, it'll top out in Perth around 2026, 27. Yes, you're going to get a couple more years of solid growth, but it'll switch off, and then it's going to go through a solid 13 to 15 years of backwards growth before you'll break through that band and go to the next level. So if you buy now, you can expect to be left hanging for many years. And this is when people get burnt, because what happens is people rush in, chasing yield, chasing cash flow, getting conned by the cash flow cuckoos, and then they buy assets, the markets switch off, as these markets in Perth and in regional Queensland, which we'll get to in future slides, are very dependent on the mining sector. The mining sector is starting to ramp up, and it will have a solid couple of years of growth. But when the mines switch off, so does the property prices. And this is what happens. So based off history, we can expect another good solid 2 years in Perth, 2 or 3 years. But once it switches off, it's going to go backwards. So people will get burnt. There'll be negative equity. And if they can't meet their mortgage repayments, the banks will be selling them, selling the properties, getting their money back, selling to the next person, or even margin calling. If you buy a property at peak market, I mean, these days you got to spend nearly 600 grand, but Armidale will probably hit 700–800 by the peak, but then it'll go back to probably go back 40–50%. If the bank gets wobbly on you, especially if you're going with a tier 2 or 3 lender and you're maxing yourself out with a 5% deposit, and then you find yourself after a couple of years in negative equity, the banks can potentially say that you are in technical default and ask you to top up or pay down some of your debt. And if you can't do it, they'll make you sell it. So this is what has happened in history. It's what happened during the GFC in the 2008-9 crisis, and we're a couple of years out from the next one. So this is another suburb not to buy in 2025, even though the next 2 or 3 years, yes, you may get growth based off history. When the market switches off, it's going to go backwards a long way. So if you bought it today, you may over the long term break even. So that's another one not to buy in 2025. Rockhampton, another area where the cash flow cuckoos like to buy houses in. Rockhampton. Everyone's going to Rockhampton because they see days on market, everything's flying out the door. Let's rush into a booming market. What a great idea. Not. As you can see, the last couple of years, it's going away gangbusters, and it will continue to go gangbusters. Based off history, it'll have another 2 or 3 years of run, but this is when shit gets scary. Look at this. If you bought it today, you can expect next to no growth, 5% growth over a 12-year period, over the next 12 years. As you can see, yes, we'll get a couple more years based off history between 2005 and 7, but then when the market switched off, it went pretty much back to where it was in 2005, median price in 2016. So if you bought it at today's rate, or if you bought it last year, well, you bought it pretty much at the peak of the market. And you'll see, yes, we'll get a couple more years of growth, but then it's going to retrace all the way back down to where it was 12 or 13 years prior. So we can expect this to be pretty much close to the peak, or if not at the peak. And based off history, it is due, once the market turns in 2027, to start its protracted long backwards period of growth. So Rockhampton is another town not to buy in 2025. What do we have next? Heatley. So this is in Townsville. I just picked any old suburb in Townsville, but they're pretty much all the same if you run the reports. And Townsville, I think this is our last one. Leave the best to last, I guess, as they say. If you buy in Townsville now, you will lose money. Look what's happened based off history. We've seen massive boom, but the market hasn't yet hit the peak. It will continue to boom the next 2 or 3 years based off history. However, once it hit the peak of the market in 2007-8, it then retraced well below and nearly lost 50%, maybe more. Let's work it out. So Townsville, do not buy in Townsville, and this is why. So you got to spend, I mean, in this suburb, 450 medium house price. Yes, it's in the midst of a boom and it's got another 2 or 3 years to run. But if you bought now or in the next couple of years, you can expect to be negative equity. Look at this. Look what happened between 2005 to 2020. So a solid 15 years where you would have lost money if you bought it today. Or if you bought it back in 2005, you lost money over 15 years, and that can be expected from 2025 over the next 10 to 15 years. So do not buy in Townsville, even though a lot of people are pushing Townsville. If they don't understand the 18-year land cycle, they'll only get themselves or yourself burnt, and it will not end well for nobody. So hope you enjoyed that. If you need help trading the cycle or buying an investment property that will not experience this boom bust growth, I'll do a take 2 in the next day or so of where are the best markets to buy in. There'll be our secret suburbs. Stay tuned, where you'll see based off history in 2005 and onwards where they've all been green and carried on. So this is what we use. We use the 18-year land cycle as a framework to understand where we sit in the market, and then we correlate that with data, with sales data for suburbs, for areas at a macro level, and then we get down into the detail with the micro level of even what types of assets perform at certain points because not everything performs in correlation. It's a fragmented market. There's only a handful of suburbs I would buy in right now for the next coming years, and there's only certain types of assets I would buy right now. I wouldn't be going out and buying regional houses. That's a hint. Anyway, until next time, hope you enjoyed it. As always, this is by no means financial advice. As I'm not a financial advisor, you should go out and seek financial advice first, even though financial advisors don't really know much. But if this resonates with you and you want to buy an investment property and you want to make sure that you are buying in a market that will perform and not go through a protracted stagnant period or go through a complete downturn when the market turns in 2027, get in touch today. Happy to chat. Happy to run reports of your own properties that you have. If you've already got conned by the blue chip bandits or the cash flow cuckoos, I've helped many people that are currently in positions before it's too late. So don't wait till the market turns. Reach out today. Catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching.